Okay, so today is the second session of the second semester on Reddit Fusion category. So yesterday we did the first review part about the first semester. And today we will again do a review part. In fact, as I said yesterday, we will need 4 sessions to review what we did last semester. So yesterday we already covered the introduction, where we recalled many things, and we started the preliminary part. So we went up to page 20. Yeah, up to that. Okay. Okay, so we were now in the subsection dedicated to trace, square norm, and global dimension. So we defined before the Frobenius power dimension, and now we will define the categorical dimension. So yesterday we said that the categorical dimension here, we need to choose an isomorphism between natural isomorphism between the identity functor and the double dual functor. And with that, we mentioned yesterday, we were able to define a dimension by closing loop on the left or on the right, depending on the choice of this natural isomorphism here. But if you multiply these two, what you get is called the square norm, and this is independent of the choice of phi. This is dependent, this is independent. In fact, the dependency of this one is cancelled by the dependency of this one. This is how you do the proof here. In fact, you have the dependency is kind of numbers, but here the number is just 1 over the number. So when you multiply the two, you get 1, and so it's independent. This is exactly what this exercise. Okay, so that's really good. Even without assuming sphericality, because sphericality is when this equals this, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, you have something independent of the choice. As I said yesterday, we have to, because you are there, you start from X, you apply evaluation, co-evaluation, you arrive to X double star. So you need something to connect the two. Anyway, so you really have something. Now, what about now? Now you take a morphism between X tensor Y to X tensor Y. Okay, so maybe I will. Okay, here we want to define, because we will need later this kind of variation of the trace. In fact, instead of because when you have something, you have a morphism between X tensor Y to X tensor Y. So you can consider X tensor Y as a single object Z, and you can make the trace like that. But here, because it's X tensor Y, you want to make just half a trace, and here you keep identity. So this is this operation, doing just the trace like that, so closing the loop using natural isomorphism just on the right part for this one, and just on the left part here. And when you can combine the two this way. So you have 3 notation, this one, and this one, for this picture, and this picture. Okay, so so this is a little technical. I don't know if I need to go into the details of that. Anyway, so you have a field K, and you consider the maximal cyclotomic extension of Q in K. The subfield generated by all roots of unity. Okay, the automorphism of that. that send each root of unity to its inverse is called the complex conjugation. Okay. Okay. So this is little bit technical because in fact, in the usual case, you don't need to care much about that. You just consider you are in the field C, an extension of Q, and the complex conjugation is the proper complex conjugation anyway. As I said here, when Q equals C, you just define like that. And so you consider the real there equal to the complex conjugation, etc. Okay. So maximal totally real subfield. No, it's too technical. Maybe I don't want to go into these details for this review part. Okay. So this is interesting. In fact, by this result, this square norm is totally positive, algebraic integer. So forget about that. We just think we are in Q equals C. You don't need to much. Yeah, technically, it may be required later, but we can skip these details for the review part. What is interesting is that the square norm of an object, as defined before, is always an algebraic integer, but more than that, is a totally positive algebraic integer. So when you have an algebraic integer, you have also the Galois conjugate. But totally positive means that it is positive and all its Galois conjugates are positive. So that's really strong assumption. Okay. Okay, so now if you assume the category to be braided, then the ideal generated by the square norm of any simple object in the ring of algebraic integer is stable under the action of the Galois group. Okay, so this is just saying that you consider, I guess, so here you take only one simple object, you take the square norm. So it's an algebraic integer, and then you generate the ideal of this algebraic integer in the ring of all algebraic integer, and this result of Ostrich is saying that this is stable by Galois conjugation. So in some sense, this is saying that the square norm as an algebraic integer, it generates all its conjugates. In some sense. Anyway. So the categorical dimension. Okay. So we define the square norm. So now you sum over all the simple objects, the square norm, and what you get is the categorical dimension or global dimension. Okay. So it's also a totally positive algebraic integer, independent of that because this is independent. Okay. And again, by the same result of Ostrich, the ideal it generates is stable by Galois conjugation. Okay. So what about now? Pivotal structure and categorical dimension. So the pivotal structure is like the psi defined before, the natural isomorphism, but with some extra structure, because it's a tensor natural isomorphism. So it's tensor. The one defined before was not necessarily tensor. Tensor means that a natural transformation, the one before was a natural isomorphism, means that. Okay. Between the identity functor and the double dual. So exactly as before, except that you have this extra assumption tensor. And the existence of such natural isomorphism is it's a definition of what we call a pivotal category. So this is called a pivotal structure, and if this exists, it's called a pivotal category. Okay. So this is very important to mention here that the existence of a pivotal structure is conjecture to always hold. We don't have a single counterexample. But they may not, they may have no a single one up to isomorphism. In fact, the collection of all the pivotal structure form what is called a torsor over the group of tensor automorphism. So this group we mentioned before, the dual of the universal grading group. So here's the universal grading group. So the tensor automorphism, it's a natural automorphism between identity functor and itself. Here, it's a natural isomorphism between the identity functor and the double dual. The double dual is almost the identity functor because in a fusion category, any object is isomorphic to its double dual. So almost, in fact, the difference is that it's not exactly the same thing because here the pivotal structure form a torsor on that. So there is a little subtlety, and the torsor maybe I will not read that because we are in the review part. So torsor is a notion of a group theory. So this is a group, the tensor automorphism form a group, and a torsor is something, it's like a kind of set which is look like to the group, but the group act on it transitively, etc., etc. So if we need to that later, maybe I will recall the definition, but for now, for the review part, we can skip the details about that. Too technical for now. So let us fix the pivotal structure, okay. So again, so the pivotal structure is exactly as before, so it's a natural isomorphism between the identity functor and the double dual functor, plus tensor structure. But we can still define the same thing as before, so we have a plus and minus the dimension as before, using that. Okay. But because of the pivotal structure, we can say something more. We can say that, in fact, the dimension of the dual of an object is the complex conjugate of the dimension of the object, and it's also equal to the dimension minus. Okay, the dimension plus of the dual is equal to dimension minus of the object, or the complex conjugate of dimension plus of the object. So I guess this is true only using the pivotal structure. May not be true in general, but okay, so you have, yeah. This is very interesting, very important, the pivotal structure. So because you have this monoidal structure, and so you can deduce that the dimension map is a ring homomorphism between the Grothendieck ring and the field. Yeah. So here you can just think about C or just the cyclotomic field. Anyway. Okay. Okay. So we will write D instead of D plus if there is no ambiguity. Okay. So these are called the categorical or quantum dimension of X. Okay. Because you have that, in some sense, in the pivotal structure, the D plus itself do not much depend on the choice of the pivotal structure. It may be because of this property, it may be more or less independent, up to maybe a root of unity, maybe, but very close to be independent. In fact, the choice of the pivotal structure when you talk about categorical dimension, is always under the choice of the pivotal structure, usually speaking. But because of that, it's almost independent of the choice up to maybe some root of unity. Anyway, but choosing. Wait, I'm completely wrong. Wait. Uh, no, no. Sorry about that. No, this is not independent of the choice up to a root of unity, because in fact, the choice of the pivotal structure is the same thing as choosing a ring homomorphism. And choosing a ring homomorphism is the same thing. For example, if you consider the category of representation rep G, it's the same thing as choosing a column in the character table. So of course, not every column are just the other up to a root of unity. So choosing a pivotal structure is the same thing as choosing a ring homomorphism, which is, for the group case, the same thing as choosing a column in the character table. So quaterical dimension is really relative to the choice of the pivotal structure. There is no for the dimension of the object, but for the global dimension, as written here, it is independent. Okay. Wait. That's really strange. Yeah. Okay. And you cannot choose every column in the character table when in the group case, because you need to have no zero entry. If you have no zero entry, you keep this property even for every column with no zero entry. Anyway, I am speaking too much. So you take an homomorphism. So this homomorphism depends on the choice of the structure as follow. So if you compose the pivotal structure with the tensor automorphism, this is interesting. As I said before, the set of pivotal structure is a torsor over the group of tensor automorphism. So, in some sense, the pivotal structure is transitive under the action of this group. And so you can go from one pivotal structure to another just by choosing a tensor automorphism. Okay. So you choose a tensor automorphism, which, as we said before, is the same thing as choosing a morphism between the universal grading group and the field. So you choose just a morphism. And so under this choice, the new dimension is the same thing as the previous dimension up to multiplying by this multiplicative constant, depending on this choice. Okay, and this one is just the degree we defined before for the universal grading group. Okay. Pivotal structure is uniquely determined by the pivotal structure is uniquely determined by this homomorphism. Okay, so pivotal structure is called spherical when d plus equals d minus. Okay, for all object, which is the same thing as saying that the dimension of the dual of an object is equal to the dimension of the object, which is the same thing as saying that all the dimensions are real. Because we remember this is equal to that. Okay. So if spherical structure, so we have the same thing as before. The collection of pivotal structure form a torsor. The collection of spherical structure form also a torsor, but over something a little bit, something like that, in fact. So the group before was so what was the group before? It was K. The before for the pivotal it was just K star, but for spherical you just keep this subgroup of K star plus and minus one. So it's a group of order two. Tensor over this group is much more restrictive. So you see by this way that the spherical structure is very restrictive compared to the pivotal structure. Okay, and then the square. So in the spherical case, the dimension here, the square of the dimension is the same thing as the square norm. So this is independent. So this is independent. So the only dependency is just plus or minus on the strokes of the spherical structure, I guess. So the spherical fusion category is a fusion category equipped with a spherical structure. Okay. So you take a pivotal. What? You take pivotal fusion category. You take an object and you take a morphism between this object and itself. Okay. Okay, so you have the trace on the left or on the right as defined before. Okay, so in the spherical case, the trace on the left and on the right are the same. So this is just a small generalization of that. In fact, we can prove that is equivalent. Yeah, that spherical category. Okay. So in the spherical case, you don't need to specify plus or minus, so you just have the trace of a morphism without specification. Okay. Spherical extension of spherical category. Okay. So existence of pivotal or spherical structure is conjecture to always exist. But it's not proved. But what we can prove, that if you take a fusion category without spherical structure, you can always have an extension which is pivotal and in fact turns out to be spherical. So you take any fusion category. So we know that any fusion category admits a natural isomorphism between the identity functor and the force dual. Yeah, tensor. I guess it should be. So you don't always have a natural isomorphism between the identity functor and the double dual, which is tensor, but for the force dual, it exists. And so, by taking a kind of square root of this natural tensor functor, tensor isomorphism, you get a natural, you get a pivotal structure, but in an extension of that. So the spherical extension, so denoted like that. So the object are pair, where X is an object in C, and this F is a morphism between F, X in its double dual, an isomorphism. And as I said, it's a kind of square root, because when you compose with itself, you recover that. So you take the object as a pair, the simple object as a pair, where X is a simple object here, and this is just a square root of that. Okay? And you can define the morphism between the object. Maybe I will skip the details, to satisfy some property, etc. So, so as I said, yeah, there is a kind of so for any simple object, there are exactly two choices depending on a sign. That's why it's a C2 extension. There is an extension of order 2. the category is spherical. So this category, which is a C2 extension, turned out to be spherical. Well, the spherical structure is just given by that. And as I say, it's a C2 extension. The dimension is just 2 times the dimension of that. Okay. So the spherical extension is a specific case of the equivariantization construction. So this is what that will be the new part of this semester, equivariantization. And so this spherical extension is an equivariantization for this group, C2. Okay. So this is precisely the category of equivalent object in C under this action. So I guess we will denote this way. E of C2. Okay. Properties of tensor functor. Okay, so proposition 211. You take two fusion categories and a tensor functor between these two fusion categories. Then, so this tensor functor is fully faithful. So fully faithful is recalled here. If only if this map is an isomorphism for all x. So what is this map? So I guess this functor induces a map between that and that. Yeah. Because the functor is a functor between objects, but also between morphisms. So you really have a map between these two morphism space. Okay. So this is fully faithful if only if this map is an isomorphism for all objects at the beginning. Okay. So if the probability bound dimensions are the same, and if this is fully faithful, then it's an equivalence. Okay. So you have this fully faithful as defined here, or as a equivalent condition here. And if moreover the two dimensions are the same, probability bound dimension, then the two categories are equivalent. And if you just have so surjective, yeah. So if F is surjective as defined before, you remember yesterday we recalled that in kind of weak version of the surjectivity. It's enough. So the equality of the dimension is enough to get equivalence also. Okay, so I skip the proof. Okay, so now you take a fusion category, you take two fusion subcategory, and you consider the Deligne tensor product. So you consider a tensor functor between the Deligne tensor product of these two C defined this way. In fact, you take an element here defined like that, and you map it the real tensor, the usual tensor product of the object in C. So this is well defined. So you need to see how no, this is okay. Where the restriction to DI is a natural embedding. Of course. Yeah. So when you put 1 here, then this is really the natural embedding there. Or when you put 1 here, this is really the natural embedding. Okay. So then this lemma is saying that this tensor functor is fully faithful if only if the intersection here is trivial. The trivial fusion category back. Okay. So this is so this lemma is connected to something very interesting called factorizable braided fusion category. Another, also, another way to define the notion of modular fusion category. The fact it is factorizable. So the definition using factorizable involve this kind of thing. Anyway, so okay, lemma, you have two subcategory, fusion subcategory. You have this transfer functor using Deligne, etc. And it is fully phased, fully Fermi. The intersection of the two is trivial. So the proof is there. So I skip the proof. Okay. Okay. Pseudo-unitary fusion category. So you take a fusion category and you take an embedding. So you can, maybe you can forget. We can skip these details. You just take the usual. So this is the technical details. Okay. You can, in fact, the point is that you can just think this as already included in R. So this is maybe I wrote a remark about that later. Anyway, you take this abstract field and a kind of embedding this way, and you can define the notion of phi pseudo-unitary, meaning that if the Frobenius parent dimension is equal to the categorical dimension of the category up to applying this phi, but not up to, you apply this phi. But yeah, in practice, you can forget about that. You just say the categorical dimension is equal to the Frobenius parent dimension. But for some technical reason, sometimes you need to consider alternative embedding. Anyway, this is important, of course. You have to be careful in number theory, but maybe in practice, may not need much about that. Anyway, for any field embedding, we have. Okay, so what this is saying. So the category, the square norm is always less than the Frobenius parent dimension square. So let me omit, I just say the square norm is less than that. So the categorical dimension is less than that, etc. And so using that, this is equivalent to this, to this for all simple objects. Okay, so in particular, maybe I will skip that. Here there is a notion of phase I had in mind before. So But anyway, I'll skip that. A spherical structure on the fusion category C is called phi positive if this is always positive for all simple objects. Okay. So again, you can forget about it. Just say it is positive if this is positive. But this maybe, so you can think that as a generalization. So you can raise the definition without that, which is just saying that. But maybe with that, it's a little generalization because you can maybe you can consider a kind of Galois conjugate of the category. So you can have a positive fusion category, and you can consider a Galois conjugate, which is not positive, but which is phi positive by another embedding. So yeah, I'm not convinced, but it should be useful. Okay. If you have a positive spherical structure, it is unique. So that's important. Yeah, basically, because as you remember what we defined before, the square norm is independent. So if you have something positive, with the independence of the square norm, you directly get that it's unique. Okay. So a pseudo-unitary fusion category has a unique positive spherical structure. It's time to stop. Okay. So time for the pause. Okay. So a pseudo-unitary fusion category has a unique positive spherical structure. Okay. That's also very important. So it's proved in this paper. Sorry. Oh. No, I forgot the paper then. Because I erase something and then I remove the thing. So that it was 2000 something. I forgot which one. So anyway, in by equation so by these two previous equation, the positivity in a pseudo-unitary fusion category. So the phi positive spherical structure in a pseudo-unitary fusion category satisfy that. Okay. Yeah. So what this is saying is saying that so if you forget about that, it's just saying that in a pivotal structure, in a pseudo-unitary fusion category, the dimension is exactly the Frobenius-Bound dimension up to yeah. So that's yeah. I see. Maybe here this is meaningful to consider that because it's not true that this equals that for all pseudo-unitary fusion category. What is true is the global dimensions are the same by definition. Yeah, but you always have that also. But in fact, yeah, if the global dimensions are the same, this does not imply that. Because you can have some sign. That's why you have the notion of Tanakian and super Tanakian, because you have a sign. So Tanakian symmetric, I guess a symmetric fusion category is always pseudo-unitary, but it's not always positive. It's positive if it is Tanakian. In general, it's super Tanakian because you have something positive or negative. But okay, the choice of the anyway. You can always make something positive if you choose a good Saka structure. So it's very close to be so pseudo-unitary is very close to be positive. It's like it's positive up to a sign. So if you make the good choice, you can always make it positive up to a sign, etc. Okay, so integral and weakly integral fusion category. So weakly integral just mean that the global Frobenius span dimension is an integer. Integral mean all the Frobenius span dimension of the object are the integer. So be careful, they are not equivalent. Weakly integral is strictly weaker than integral because you can have category where the Frobenius span dimension of the object are square root of integer, like Ising. So Ising is properly weakly integral. So for weakly integral fusion category, the concept of pseudo-unitarity does not depend on the choice of that. Okay. Okay, so this, what I was confused with before is that this thing is only useful out of the weakly integral case. Okay. If you are in the weakly integral case, or more specifically in the integral case, you don't need to care about that. Because in my personal research, I mainly focus on integral case. That's why I never consider this thing. Anyway. Therefore, we simply use pseudo-unitary instead, etc. Moreover, as shown in the following proposition, pseudo-unitarity in this context is automatic. Yeah. Weakly integral implies pseudo-unitary. Okay, so you define the group of positive rational. Okay, and we will consider kind of grading. So you take a weakly integral fusion category. Then, as I said before, it is pseudo-unitary. Categorical dimension equals the Frobenius span dimension. So it's always true for weakly integral, so that's very strong. And for every simple object, the square norm is the square of the Frobenius span dimension. But as I said, this is the dimension of X is not may not be that in general, but the square norm it is. Okay, so that's okay. So now define a map, a kind of grading on the category this way. So for any simple object, you map a number here up to a square. So a positive rational up to a square rational. Okay, so you take an object and you map the square of the Frobenius span dimension. In fact, the class of that here. And this define a grading. Okay. So maybe I will skip that. It's too technical. It's just to... but it's interesting, but yeah. So you have a grading with this group. If you don't follow, okay, so the trivial component of this grading, the trivial component here, okay, correspond to the maximal integral fusion subcategory. So you have weakly integral fusion category. So it may be properly weakly integral. So it may have really objects which are of dimension not an integer, but just a square of an integer. In fact, the neutral component of this grading is exactly the maximal integral fusion subcategory. So you have a weakly integral, but inside you can have fusion subcategory which are integral, and the maximal one is exactly the neutral component for this grading. Okay. So weakly integral fusion category has an integral global Frobenius dimension, but the converse is not true. This is saying that, yeah, weakly integral imply So weakly integral implies pseudo-unitary. So in particular, the categorical dimension equals the Frobenius-Poisson dimension for weakly integral. And this, in weakly integral case, it is equal, so it is an integer. But the converse is not true. You can have a fusion category where the categorical dimension is an integer without being weakly integral because it's not equal to the Frobenius-Poisson dimension. Then the Frobenius-Poisson dimension may not be an integer. For example, there is a Youngli category of categorical dimension 5, but of Frobenius-Poisson dimension, this which is not an integer. So the notion of fusion category with categorical dimension an integer is a generalization of the notion of a strict generalization of the notion of weakly integral fusion category. And in fact, this I expect that this to be much more complicated. In fact, it is so much more complicated that in some sense, all the fusion category are included in a category of integer global dimension because you take any category and you make the Deligne tensor product of any category with some Galois automorphism, and then what you get here is a category of integral categorical dimension. So any category is included in the category of integral global dimension. So it's hopeless, in fact, to expect to classify, to expect this class to be as friendly as this one. Okay, so yeah, Ising fusion category. Yeah, Ising fusion category is integral but not weakly integral, as I said before, because you have object of square root for its point dimension. Okay. So any fusion subcategory of a weakly integral fusion category is itself weakly integral. Okay. So the weakly integral is stable by taking fusion subcategory. Okay. If a fusion category is faithfully graded by a group, then that's very useful. So you have a fusion category, a faithful grading by a group, and then the Frobenius-Poisson dimension is just the Frobenius-Poisson dimension of the neutral component times the order of the group. That's really useful. Okay. Okay. So we will prove later that for dimension instead of Frobenius-Poisson dimension, categorical dimension. So what do we get here? So by combining this proposition, we propose these two propositions. By combining these two propositions and using the fact that any finite subgroup of that, the grading group we defined before, is a two group, so a finite group of order 2, we obtain that. Okay. We obtain that weakly integral fusion category with odd dimension is integral. Okay, so there's two groups, so you have something even. So if it is odd, it forces the subgroup you consider to be trivial, and so the grading is trivial, and so remember that the neutral component is maximal, but if the group is trivial, the neutral component is everything, so it's integral. So this is what is written in this proof. Okay, the following conditions for a fusion category are equivalent. So the fusion category is integral if and only if there is a faithful K-linear functor such that Okay. So a fusion category is integral if and only if there is a quasi-fiber functor. If and only if it is equivalent to the categoric dimension of finite dimensional representation of the quasi-off algebra. Okay, so this is about Tanaka-Crane reconstruction theorem generalization. When you have a fiber functor, it's off algebra, of course, are integral, because the Frobenius point dimension of the object are exactly the dimension of the representation of the off algebra, so it's an integer. When you relax fiber by quasi-fiber, the quasi-fiber is a fiber functor when, yeah, you have some additional tensor action. So between fiber functor and quasi-fiber functor, there is you relax a little bit the kind of tensor action. Then you get the notion of quasi-off algebra, which, according to this proposition, cover all the representation category of this kind of algebra, cover all the possible integral fusion category. So this is very deep because the classification of integral fusion category is not known. It's very complicated. So you can say, oh, maybe you can reformulate that in terms of off algebra or quasi-off algebra, but quasi-off algebra may be a little bit tricky, in fact. It's not clear that it is a good framework to study that. Maybe the framework of integral fusion categories is more friendly for most of the application, but it's good to know that, in fact, this categorical object, an integral fusion category, is more or less covered by a purely algebraic object, a quasi-off algebra. But in fact, it's also true for any fusion category. You don't need to put integral, but you have to relax quasi-off algebra by something quasi-weak of algebra. So the structure become more and more tricky, yeah. So it's good to know that you have an purely algebraic counterpart, but it may not be so useful. So if the category C satisfy this condition, okay, so yeah. So just saying that the Frobenius point dimension is just the dimension of the representation, and so etc. So the dimension, the global Frobenius point dimension is just the dimension of the off algebra or quasi-off algebra, etc. Okay. So the algebra in proposition 223. Yeah, here. This algebra is automatically semi-simple because the category is fusion. And a fusion category is by definition a finite semi-simple tensor category. So, okay. So, by combining previous results and some formula, what do we get? A weakly integral fusion category has a unique pi-positive spherical structure for each field embedding. Yeah, okay. So here I'm not convinced. Again, yeah, weakly integral. Okay, well, let me see. Yeah. So weakly integral implies pseudo-unitary. Positive implies pseudo-unitary, but positive is not equivalent to pseudo-unitary. as I said before regarding symmetry category, Tanaka category, super Tanaka category, etc. Okay. Anyway, but you can always choose. So in fact, the difference between Tanakian, symmetric, super Tanakian is not at the level of the fusion category itself, but at the level of the braiding. But if you forget about that, you can always have a positive structure. But this positive structure we will see later will not be the one you need to choose for to deal with the braiding. That's why you have this super Tanakian aspect in the symmetric case. But if you only consider fusion category, in the weakly integral case, you can always have the positivity. You can always choose the positive circular structure. For integral fusion category, the concept of phi positive does not depend on the choice. Okay. Because an integer is always invariant by Euler automorphism. So we can speak about positive instead of phi positive. Okay. The corresponding homomorphism treated with positive spherical structure is equal to this ring homomorphism is exactly the Frobenius bound dimension. So positive. So the philosophy of positive is that the categorical dimension of the object is equal to the Frobenius bound dimension. So example, you take a positive fusion category, pointed fusion category. Pointed mean that all the simple objects has dimension 1, Frobenius bound dimension 1. So it is integral, and the positive spherical structure can be described as follows. Okay. So in this specific case, you can specify explicitly the positive spherical structure. So every object is invertible. So it's another. This is equivalent to that. An object is of Frobenius bound dimension 1 if only if it is invertible. An invertible means that this is equivalent, is isomorphic to 1. So this map, this coevaluation map in general is not an isomorphism, but in the invertible case, it's an isomorphism. So in particular, it has an inverse. And we will use this inverse to define what we need. So you define a map this way. Yes, you define a map this way. In fact, you use this fake zigzag, fake because here in the true zigzag, this is the evaluation map, but here it's not evaluation map, this is inverse of co-evaluation map. So this may not be identity because it's a map from X to X double star. But you have a map, an isomorphism, and this way you define a spherical structure. This defines a positive spherical structure. So this is a pivotal structure tensor because of that. Okay. So okay. So this is a kind of proof. So I will skip. Etc. So it's straightforward. Okay. Braided fusion categories and non-degeneracy. So now we can really start to recall what we are specifically interested in this class, so the braided fusion category. S-Stil matrix of a braided fusion category. So recall, as we said in the introduction, a braided tensor category is a tensor category with a natural isomorphism depicted like that, satisfying some axiom, the hexagon axiom, etc. So we define a notion of left and right trace, left and right dimension for object in any fusion category, which depend on the choice of a natural isomorphism. Okay, so this is exactly what we recall at the beginning of this class. If you replace, so you can replace. Remember when we discussed the notion of torsor, etc. You can replace that by that where that is an automorphism of the identity functor. You still get a pivotal structure. Okay. So what is the difference when you change that by that? So the dimension is changed by that, so this scalar, up to a sign, up to this or the inverse. Okay. So this for plus and inverse for what we already said. Okay. And here, so this definition is really smart due to Pavletnikov. The way to generalize the notion of S matrix, but when you don't have the spherical structure. So you really use, you have a kind of dependency of the choice of that, but we will use this kind of trick here to show it is not, you get something independent. Okay. So you take a braided fusion category and you define the S-Stil matrix this way. So this generalizes the notion of S matrix in a premodular category. So what you use, in fact, this operation we defined before. So this kind of variation of trace, both left and right, of the composition of the braiding with itself, 2 times braiding. So you do the 2 times the braiding, and then you do this variation of trace. You get that, and you divide by this left and right dimension of x and y. So pictorially, you get that. So this depends on the choice. This depends on the choice that we will show that the ratio do not depend on the choice. Because the dependency will cancel. And if we ignore the phi, in fact, you can pictorially you can see that as just this number depicted this way divided by this number depicted this way. So this is really this S-Stil matrix is in the premodular case, it's a kind of renormalization of the S matrix because the S matrix defined for a premodular category is just that. So the S-Stil matrix is a kind of generalization up to renormalization. But here you have no choice. You have to renormalize, otherwise it's dependent on that. This is because of the renormalization that you get something independent. This alone is dependent on the choice, but this renormalized S-mat is independent. And in fact, the fact that it is independent, the idea is exactly the same as for the square norm. Yeah. So dependency is cancelled. Okay. So this is exactly what it is written here. If you replace that by that, as described before, the numerator and denominator expression are multiplied by that. And because of the torsor property, the choice is dependent on the choice, but any choice is the same thing as you fix one and you take a tensor automorphism. So if you fix one and you change by a tensor automorphism, what you get is the same thing because the the influence of the tensor automorphism cancel. Okay, so this is invariant. This is a true invariant of a Brady diffusion category. Okay, so a Brady diffusion category is said to be non-degenerate when this matrix is invertible. So the matrix with this entry, where X and Y are simple objects, it's an invertible matrix. So non-degenerate Brady diffusion category. So properties of a Brady diffusion category that are equivalent to its properties. Yeah. So we will see later that there are several equivalent ways to define non-degenerate using Muger result, Muger centralizer, etc. Trivial Muger centralizer. Okay, so premodular and modular category. So premodular category is a Brady diffusion category with a spherical structure. And in fact, yeah. So we can reformulate this definition in terms of twist. In any tensor category, the functor mapping an object to its dual, the double dual functor, has a tensor functor structure. In any tensor category, the functor naturally has a tensor functor structure. Wait. The Brady structure on C provides a natural morphism. So what I am talking about as a naturally has a tensor functor structure. Wait. No, what I'm confused is that this is specifically what we said about a pivotal structure. So maybe the functor naturalism. Wait. No. I am confusing two things. This is a functor. Here we are talking about a functor. This is not the natural isomorphism between the identity functor and the double dual functor. This is just a functor between C and itself. So sorry, what I said is not a functor between identity. It's not a natural transformation between identity functor and double dual functor. This is just a functor between C and itself. And this functor is a tensor functor. Okay. So a Brady structure on C provides a natural morphism. Okay, so if you have a Brady structure, you can get a natural isomorphism from the braiding. Okay, so in fact, I will not read this, but it is just this. What is a natural isomorphism is a map between X and X double star, but you use a braiding, so you make this braiding with X the dual, you apply the evaluation map, co-evaluation map, etc. So you get something like that. So this is an isomorphism. It's easy to see because you can make another picture, a similar picture, and then they will, using the hexagon axiom, maybe you can get some identity. Yeah, inverse picture. In general, So in general, this is not a tensor isomorphism, so it's not pivotal. It is pivotal up to this modification. So it is not pivotal, but it's something very close to pivotal. You compose with the double braiding like that. Okay. So for any isomorphism that is functorial, functorial mean. Okay, so for any natural isomorphism, so any natural isomorphism can be written as the composition of that with a twist. Okay. Because this is an isomorphism, so you can go the other way. And so you get something from, because this is if you put, this is an isomorphism, so you put it the other side, so you get a natural, an automorphism of the identity functor. So it's, yeah, this is that. Okay, since the isomorphism take that, but this may not be a tensor. Okay. So from the equation above, okay. So now, using that, this, and using that, you get this is a tensor isomorphism, so pivotal structure, if and only if. So you apply the axiom of pivotal structure to that. If and only if you have that. So this property on the twist. Okay. So a twist is nothing but a sequence of numbers, because this is an isomorphism between a simple object and itself. But this sequence of numbers should agree with the double braiding this way to provide a pivotal structure. Okay. So an automorphism like that satisfying this condition is called a twist. Okay. So this should not be called a twist in general, it's just an automorphism of the identity functor. But when it satisfies this condition, so when it is tensor, it is called a twist. Okay. Okay. So a pivotal structure on a braided fusion category is spherical if and only if the corresponding twist. So remember, everything, as we explained here, everything can come from a twist and the composition of that. So spherical is equivalent to that. So the twist of the dual is the dual of the twist of this object. Here is considered as a morphism between X and itself. And such a twist is called a rebound structure. So a premodular category is the same thing as a braided fusion category with a rebound structure. So it's just a reformulation. So the existence of a spherical structure for a braided fusion category is the same thing as a rebound structure. Okay. And in fact, this was the original definition of premodular. But now we know it's equivalent. So you take a simple object. Okay. So yeah, as I said, we often consider this isomorphism as a scalar because X is simple. Okay, so now what about S matrix? So we define S tilde matrix. Now what about S matrix? So it's very similar to S matrix, but it's not renormalized. So you take a premodular category with a spherical structure and you denote the corresponding trace and dimension this way. So the S matrix depend on the choice of the spherical structure. Defined exactly as before, but without renormalization. There is no renormalization. Okay. So this is just, if you forget about that, this is just this thing, the entry, so as before. Okay, so normalized S matrix is exactly the way to recover the S tilde matrix in the general case. So you just do like that. Okay. So this is really what this is really what the previous definition of S tilde matrix cover. This renormalized S matrix. So the S matrix depends on the choice of the spherical structure. So this isomorphism. So remember, the choice of a spherical structure is the same as the choice of a twist. So instead, you can replace. Okay. So alternative approach is to use U for 12 instead of pi, replacing that by that. Okay. So if so anyway. So a premodular category is modular if the S matrix is invertible. Yeah. So a premodular category is modular if and only if it is non-degenerate in the sense of the definition before. It's okay because the S matrix and S tilde matrix, the S matrix is invertible if only if the S tilde matrix is invertible, so no problem. By some rank argument. For a spherical fusion category, an object Y and a morphism between Y and itself, we define a trace. Okay. What I don't understand what I am saying here. For a spherical fusion category, an object and a morphism, we define a trace. So it's a scalar. In particular, this applies for a premodular fusion category using that and that. So I guess we will use that later. So it's okay. So it's almost time. So let me state this proposition. So you take a simple object in a premodular category, and this is a scalar corresponding to the twist of this simple object. Then, okay, the trace of this morphism is exactly the dimension of the object divided by this scalar. Okay. So this means that the twist. So yeah. So here is saying that if you consider this is the inverse braiding. But consider the braiding, you can have this formula without inverse, but in fact, it's stated this way because the proof is more natural. Stating this way. Okay. So in fact, yeah, you can define the twist pictorially. So the twist is just so it looks like a bit the picture for the entry of the ST matrix, but there is only one thing on top and one thing on the bottom. So you just twist the loop and you divide the twist loop by a loop. And so what you get is just the multiplicative component of the twist. So that's why it's called the twist. Just what this twist is doing multiplicatively. Okay. So in particular, you can define the twist directly from the braiding this way. Anyway, so I guess we'll stop here. So the proof. So the proof of this proposition is that yeah, so I guess the proof here is very long. So we will skip all that. And I guess we will restart from here next week. Yeah, so let me just, because I will not come back to that next week. So this is just the proof. So the proof is quite long of that. So the relation between the twist, the categorical dimension, and the trace of the braiding. So it's a kind of fundamental relation, which is just saying that the twist is just pictorial is just that, the value of twisting the loop. And the proof is more convenient this way, but you can also, this is true also this way. And the proof is that, so the proof is, yeah, it is quite complicated. You need to consider this kind of complicated commuting diagram. You use the naturality, the hexagon axiom, etc. No, here it's just the naturality. Naturality of the braiding. So this is very useful to. The braiding is natural, so you can do like that. You can move that here. Okay, and here is hexagon axiom. This is trivial. So you have all these pictorial proof, which are components of this big diagram. So you prove that this commute using this pictorial proof, naturality, hexagon axiom, or something trivial. And so you get that this equals this, which is exactly this kind of picture you get. So this equality between This is exactly what we want. So I will, etc. So here, is there something interesting here to say? So if I take 5 minutes, but because of the sound problem, I need, maybe I can take more time. Is there interesting something to say here? Yeah, here we use maybe yeah, the tensor product of morphism here is a morphism of the tensor product because it's tensor functor. Okay. 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 So I guess I will stop here and see you next week.